Welcome to the State of the Nation. My name is Mike Sham, I'm your host, and today we have a very important conversation, and that is with Mikhail Kosarev, who is the press attaché to the Russian Ambassador in South Africa. Mikhail, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Hi Mike, thanks for having me.
Obviously, lots of news currently around what's going on in the Ukraine and in Russia, and it has affected South Africa. We've kind of been involved whether we like it or not. Let's start at the beginning. The special military operation, as your president has called it, explain the threat that Russia faced from Ukraine that caused the special military operation.
Okay, I'll try. Rather, it was someone else who created threats, unacceptable threats for Russia's security using Ukraine's territory. And what Ukrainian authorities did was just agreeing to the role of cannon fodder for its nationals, for Ukrainian people. Well, to briefly introduce you to the context of the situation, I need to remind that in 2014, an unconstitutional coup d'etat took place in Kiev. Coup orchestrated by the West. It toppled legitimate president Yanukovych. You might say anything about him, but he was legitimate indeed, and he was recognized as such by the entire international community, including by the West. This unconstitutional coup d'etat ousted President Yanukovych and brought radical nationalists to power. These people were in fact violently anti-Russian. These people were extremely hostile to the Russian national security interests, and that is how Ukraine embarked upon a path of breaking ties with Russia, to put it mildly. This process involved measures to curb the use of the Russian language in the territory of Ukraine, by the way, spoken by majority of Ukrainian population. They wanted to curb its use in public domain. It involved steps to persecute pro-Russian Ukrainians. Far-right ideology was imposed upon the population of Ukraine, and it was accompanied by glorification of Nazi collaborators and large-scale, full-scale rewriting of history, including our common history of Ukraine and Russia. As President of Russia put it, Ukraine was essentially turning gradually into anti-Russia. Already after a month, following a month after coup d'etat took place, Kiev regime unleashed a war against the Russian-speaking population in Donbass. Of course, this was done with approval and with assistance of the collective West. We assume that our Western non-partners, as we call them now, never stopped seeing Russia as its rival. Never stopped. And we're getting to the point now about the threats. The US and their satellites in Europe did their best to bring their military infrastructure close to Russia's borders. I'm speaking about NATO, of course. Remember, there were 5 waves of NATO expansion since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the 2008 NATO summit in Bucharest in Romania declared that Ukraine and Georgia will become NATO members in the future. So after the 2014 coup d'etat in Kiev, NATO started what we see as military exploitation of Ukrainian territory. I'm speaking of Ukraine being pumped with arms and weapons, NATO arms and weapons, Western produced. If you think that the West started delivering arms to Ukraine only in 2022, then you're wrong. It started back then in 2014. Ukraine military was trained by NATO instructors according to Western NATO standards, and elements of, which is more important, elements of NATO military infrastructure was deployed in Ukraine's territory. did you know that for a NATO missile, it will take less than 10 minutes, should it be launched from, for example, Kharkov, to reach Moscow? It's not a joke, actually. It's an existential threat to Russia. And we had to undertake some steps. Well, that's basically it.
So when you talk of the 2014 coup being driven by the West, supported by the West, what informs that? What did they do?
Well, what do you mean? What did they do exactly?
Yeah, I'm sort of.
They financed this coup. Remember, Victoria Nuland back in 2014 admitted that they spent about $5 billion to promote democracy and so on and so forth in Ukraine. What is more important for Russia, that it ousted legitimate president, and it created an unacceptable spot of tension right on Russia's border. I've already told you about military threats, about existential threats to Russia. That was Western plan. If you, for example, had a chance to read a book, Grand Chessboard, by Zbigniew Brzezinski, US,
yes.
We call it politologist. He used to say when he in this book that in order to weaken Russia, the West needs to tear Ukraine off Russia, and then without Ukraine, Russia turns into a regional power, while with Ukraine it will be world power. That's something like that.
Yeah.
If I have answered your question.
And what threat? Why would the West want to weaken Russia? What threat did Russia pose to the West from that perspective?
What threat? It's Russia was weak after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The West did anything to praise Russian democracy, to praise the economic reforms, and so on and so forth. But when Russia became stronger, when it became more self-reliant, and when it started to defend its stance, to defend its interests in the international arena, the West didn't like it. The West basically doesn't want a strong Russia. Neither Russia nor any other country to be strong and to be a rival to the West, which dominated actually the world for the last 500 years.
Now, if we go back to 2014 and what happened in Ukraine to set this all off, which was the deposing of Yanukovych, the coup, as you put it, Ukrainians had elected Yanukovych. He won the election on the back of saying that part of his mandate was to join the European Union, to follow that course. And the protest started when he when he changed that stance, even though he had been elected to carry out that mandate.
No, it's not fully correct. Let me correct you a little bit. He did not change this stance. The situation was that signing this economic alignment agreement with the European Union meant that European goods, EU-produced goods, will flow to Ukraine, while Russia and Ukraine had an agreement about free trade zone, if I'm not mistaken, about its name. This means that European goods will get competitive advantage before Russian goods, Russian produced. We need any country would need to protect, because it wasn't negotiated, never. with the European Union, that we remove tax barriers for European goods. It was never negotiated, and that's what was made clear to President Yanukovych, that if Ukraine signs this agreement, then we will have to protect our own market. We will have to introduce new tax, let's say, obstacles. Yes, for the goods coming from Ukraine, and that's when President Yanukovych said, "Whoa, guys, let us think a little bit more. What is more important for us? Let us weigh and see, estimate and see what we need more. We need free trade zone with European Union or free trade zone with Russia." But European Union and the West in general was not prepared for that step, because their stance was, you are either with us or you with Russia. And that's when they, well, basically, I believe, gave commands to their accomplices in Ukraine to start off with coup d'etat.
Okay, and that obviously led to the beginnings of the war, which started off in the Donbas region, and then Russia advanced on Crimea, and eventually led to where we are now, or the launch of the special military operation, which was to protect Russia's interests, as you put it. Now, what is the ultimate objective of the special military operation?
Ultimate objective.
Because it's unclear. It's unclear as an observer for me now. What does it look like? What does victory look like for Russia?
This question is actually closely connected with the first one, interconnected and interrelated. But let me explain it in different words. There are two aspects of this issue. The first one is related to Ukraine itself. That was turned and is being, better to say, is being turned to a country openly hostile towards Russia. By efforts of radical nationalists who were brought to power with the support of the West, and with the approval, with silent approval, and sometimes not silent approval of the collective West. It needs to be emphasized that this process of turning Ukraine into anti-Russia did not start last year. It was basically in 2014, after the coup, when the first, as we say in Russian, ring, the first bell rang for us. The first thing the forces who seized the power in Kiev did after the coup was passing a law to strip Russian of its status of a state language. Despite the fact that a vast majority, like I said, of Ukraine, up to 88%, according to some estimates, spoke Russian. This law actually was vetoed later by the acting head of state, which took its place, this place after they ousted President Yanukovych. But the fact itself, it clearly showed that these forces have anti-Russian intentions. And this is when actually Crimea and the region of Donbas, populated predominantly by ethnic Russians who speak Russian, opposed to this unconstitutional coup d'etat. People said, these guys, Bandera and Shukhevich, that you glorify as heroes, they are actually Nazis. They are guilty of murdering Jews and Gypsies and Russians and Ukrainians and so on. And my grandparents, our grandparents, fought against them in World War II. So please leave us alone to speak Russian, to cherish our history, to bring up our children as we want. That's what happens with in Crimea and Donbas. Well, Crimea held a referendum to become part of Russia, and the Donbas embarked upon its path, long path, as part of Ukraine, to oppose these new, let's say, innovations of Nazi regime in Kiev, to fight these steps.
But surely we must also throw into the mix that for a very, very important part of the Second World War, the Soviet Union was allies of the Nazi regime. They then changed sides.
No.
And
that's not true. Soviet Union, USSR, and Nazi regime were never allies. If you are saying about the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it's not. It's a non-aggression treaty, which Nazi Germany, I mean the Third Reich, signed with a majority of European powers, including with Poland. They had agreements also with Estonia, with Great Britain, with France, if I'm not mistaken, well, would you call all these nations allies of the Third Reich? No, of course not. And what is more important for us in this regard, that this non-aggression treaty was signed by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the last to sign such an agreement with Germany, and it did so only when it was left with none other option to prevent to postpone the coming world conflict. I'm speaking of course, of Munich betrayal, the so-called Munich agreements, which opened to Hitler way to the east.
The point that I'm getting to is that it seems almost. How can I put it? It seems like an odd point to bring up this whole Nazification thing 80 years after the end of the war. Whatever happened then happened. There were good guys and bad guys on each side. There was terrible atrocities committed. It doesn't seem like a starting point for a conflict in the 21st century. Because, otherwise you can go back, if you're Ukrainian, to the Holodomor, right? Which is obviously a part of their history as well.
It doesn't seem, as you said, like the starting point for this conflict, but basically it is, because all those Nazi accomplices, Bandera followers, and the likes, fled to the west after Nazi Germany was defeated. They gave up surrendered to the Allies, to the Americans, to the British, and so on. And they found, let's say, found a quiet harbor in the West, where they cherished their anti-Russian, anti-Soviet, and anti-Russian ideology. They lived especially in Canada, for example, in the United States. They used Nazi specialists, and including Bandera followers from Ukraine, Nazi accomplices from Ukraine, for their own purposes. And they lived in their close community, and they, like I said, cherished their ideology, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, they returned to Ukraine. But I never finished the issue about the ultimate objective of the special military operation. So, in April 2014, like I said, Ukraine unleashed a war against the residents of Donbass, ethnic Russian-speaking population of Donbass. And between 2014 and 2022, when Russia interfered to protect the people of Donbass, they killed around 14,000 people there, including hundreds of children. Do you know what the Alley of Angels is in Donetsk? This is basically a memorial place where about 100, I think it's about 100 now, children are buried. Children who were killed by Ukrainian armed forces during this period between 2014 and 2022. You won't find this information, of course, in mainstream media. You will you can find it on internet, but you will have to search, obviously. And the apogee of this crackdown on the Russian population of Ukraine by Kiev regime was the tragedy in Trade Union's house in Odessa in May 2014, when and where Ukrainian nationalists burned alive over 40 people who opposed to this unconstitutional coup and who did not want to share Maidan values. Up to date, 9 years later, no perpetrators have been detained. That is why, among the goals of the special military operation, there are demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. This means prohibition of all far-right communities, far-right parties, political parties, Nazi parties, and elimination of military threats coming from Ukraine, military threat to Russia. The second aspect of the problem is not about Ukraine itself, but rather about Kiev masters in the West. The essence of the problem is NATO expansion and bringing NATO military infrastructure closer to Russia's borders. I've already cited the example of NATO missiles deployed in Kharkov. And Russia, it made it clear to Western partners, then partners, on numerous occasions that dragging Ukraine into NATO is completely unacceptable for us. But our warnings basically fell on deaf ears. And preempting, I don't know if you will ask me this question about Ukraine being a sovereign state and free to choose the alliance it wants to join. I want to point out, if you are a sovereign state, then you do not only enjoy rights, but you do have obligations. There is a political obligation enshrined in OSCE documents, OSCE declarations of 1999 and 2010, which reads that no one can strengthen his own security at the expense of his neighbor's security. If you can explain to me how the US, Russia, Ukraine, and almost all Europe, the whole Europe, are members of OSCE. If you can explain to me how does dragging Ukraine into NATO corresponds with this principle, I would appreciate it, but you won't be able.
No. And to be fair, the discussion around Ukraine joining NATO is still contested on all sides. It's not a done deal, right? It's not even being mentioned now. It's being mentioned more, one would imagine, by the Russian side than certainly by the West. But if it sounds to me a lot, Mikhail, like two of the objectives. One sounds a lot like revenge for what went on in Donbass, right? And another part is to stop NATO expansionism. But in actual fact, it's done exactly the opposite, because now we have Finland and Sweden joining NATO. They have bigger borders, or very significant borders, with Russia.
Well, it's not revenge. I won't agree with you in this issue. It's just like we put it. It's an attempt to protect the population of Donbass being abused and shelled and bombed by Kiev regime. I think it's enough. This is a reason enough. I have enumerated enough reasons for using the instruments we had to resort to. And as for the total situation with you mentioned with security in Europe. About new NATO members. Well, like I said, there are two issues about joining NATO. One of them is becoming a NATO member, and quite another thing, is bringing NATO military infrastructure to our borders. Ukraine have never been a NATO member, yet it had elements of NATO military infrastructure. As for Finland, which has recently become a NATO member, I can only quote our president, who said, "We have never had problems with this country. We will see what it will entail for the security, for national interest and strategic security of Russia, if to undertake necessary steps to tackle these threats." That's basically it. We need to see. There are two parts of this issue: military infrastructure and formally joining NATO.
Now, if one of the main reasons was the treatment of ethnic Russians in the Donbas region, why did Russia then choose to attack Kiev and other cities in the west of Ukraine? If the problem's in the east, why attack the western side or declared war on the whole country?
Because the ultimate goal, like I said, it's demilitarization and denazification. And the hotspot of Nazism, of neo-Nazism in Ukraine is not in Donbas, it's in Kiev. The people who seized power in Ukraine, radical nationalists, I mentioned them before, they are in Kiev. And Russia set its goal, which it will, like our president said, will be accomplished to treat, metaphorically speaking, Ukraine of this disease of Nazism, to eliminate the threats to our country.
Okay, so here we are now, just past a year into the conflict that to many analysts look like it would take a matter of days. Right? There were so many analysts that thought, this is a complete mismatch. Russia would roll through Ukraine almost at the speed that as fast as they could go. But there's been some stern resistance in Ukraine. There've been a lot of damage on in terms of men and material on both sides. Mm-hmm. What's the mood like for the war in Russia?
Well, first of all, this myth about Russia rolling in and seizing the whole country in 3 days or 4 days or 2 weeks was invented by Western propaganda. This is something they themselves invented, believed in, and then spread.
So what was the feeling?
We never set any terms for the special military operation. We steadily and firmly pursue our objectives in this regard, and all the goals of the special military operation will be achieved. As for any obstacles about your idea of the military operation moving slowly, well, it's not a war, it's a special military operation. Why is it called special military operation? Because it is limited. It is limited in our goals. It's not about occupation of Ukraine or making Ukraine, making Ukraine something else, which it is now. It is not about turning Ukraine into ruins.
But yet a lot of the attack is on infrastructure.
Let us touch upon this issue, if you wish, a little bit later.
Sure do.
Please let me finish. It is limited. This operation is limited in resources Russia uses, and that's why there is a metaphor that we are fighting there with one arm behind us. That's why it is not.
Which is the other arm? Is the other arm the nuclear arm?
Now, about nuclear button, I want to emphasize there is actually a range of reasons why we can resort to nuclear weapon. Russia can resort to nuclear weapon. It is open. It is public. It is enshrined in our documents. You can just familiarize yourself if you wish. And there are two basic reasons when there is a threat to the very existence to our country created. I'm not quoting, just I'm bringing to you the idea. Threat to the very existence of our country created with the use of conventional weapons, or if there is nuclear weapons. There are nuclear weapons used against our country, and there have been, for now, no reasons for anyone to doubt that we strictly follow the provisions of this document. What I wanted to point out: the only nation to have ever used in the history of mankind to have ever used nuclear weapons against civilian populations during a warfare was United States. Yeah. Yet the Western propaganda tries to accuse Russia of nuclear threats and so on. It is only a retaliation. That's what our president says when some Western politicians, some Western officials say they are ready to press a nuclear button to launch nukes against Russia, and we respond to this threat. We are called aggressors.
Okay, so you mentioned...
Does it make sense?
You mentioned that you're fighting the war with one arm tied behind your back, right? Which arm is tied behind your back?
It's a metaphor.
For what?
For illustrating that we are not using
all of your power.
All of our power. Yes.
Excluding nuclear, or including.
Excluding nuclear, of course.
So, in other words, if the threat grows, we could see more Russian aggression.
Well, first, again, it's not an aggression. It's a special military operation to protect people of Donbass. Aggression was unleashed against the people of Donbass in 2014, like I said. This was a war which conducted by the Kiev regime against the people of Donbass. As for more action, what you just said, a special military operation is going its way. I cannot provide details, and I cannot give more illustrations, regrettably, because it's the matter of the Ministry of Defense.
Sure.
As our president says, the dynamics of the operation is positive, and all its goals will be accomplished. It might take time, but all its goals will be accomplished.
And Mikhail, in any war is popular at the start. There's almost not one war in the history of the world that wasn't popular with the population at large at the start. Right? Everybody thinks they're going to win it. Everybody's up for it. Everybody buys the story.
Now we are returning to the point you outlined in one of your previous questions about the mood in Russian society. Yeah. I can give you only one number that would illustrate the mood. The level, according to a recent poll, the level of support of Vladimir Putin in Russia reaches 80%. 80.
That's support, not necessarily Vladimir Putin against another alternative. I mean, we're not talking about a place lined up with choices, right? I mean, that's a kind of a yes or no question, isn't it?
It's something else you're trying to involve in this discussion about the elections in Russia. I think it's a big topic for one of our next meetings. If you wish, I will be pleased to introduce you to this issue.
Yes.
But still, the level of support of Russian president reaches 80%, and I can understand myself. I myself personally can understand why, because I have my grandparents participating. Had my grandparents participating in World War II, fighting against Nazism, and it's difficult for me to see this brown plague raising its head in a neighboring country.
Can we discuss the role of the Wagner Group? Because this seems anomalous to everything you've said. On the one hand, Russia's protecting Russia's interests. Russia's fighting the good fight, according to what you say. They're trying to weed out bad people that are going to do bad things to Russia. Russia feels threatened. But then most of the fighting seems to be done, or much of the fighting seems to be done, by a completely outsourced mercenary group.
That's not again the special military operation. All the details, what happens on the battlefield, is a matter of the Ministry of Defense. I don't feel like
because Prigozhin is not keeping it on the battlefield. He's taken to social media, complaining about the support he's getting from the Russian government.
Yes,
so it's not like this
opportunity. I had a chance to read what South African media outlets write and show to public domain. But like I said, it's not the issue of the foreign ministry. It's not the issue of foreign policy. It's the matter of the Ministry of Defense. So please let me not comment on this one.
That's fair, because it just feels out of line. If this is a moral war, just fight, to get a mercenary organization to do the fighting seems to betray a lot of the argument.
I can only think that they are all people too. They are all Russians, and they see what happens in Ukraine too.
Yeah.
We can't say they are not completely motivated by anything except for money. So we can't say so.
Would you say there's any comparison between the Wagner Group and, let's say, the Azov battalion? In both cases, you got soldiers for hire doing the dirty work.
Azov battalion was recognized long before the launch of the special military operation, was recognized as far-right extremist group in the United States, in Japan, in many countries of the collective West, basically. It is a Nazi grouping. But when the special military operation started, they all were quick to strip Azov battalion, Azov Nazis, of their status. That's what would like you to understand. It's a double standards.
Yes.
These are double standards. When the issue involves Russia, there are always double standards from the West, from the side of the collective West.
So let's wrap it up by saying, we're heading into the northern summer fighting season. This is going to be quite a rough year, isn't it? As the summer rolls in, because there's going to be big military moves from both sides, one would imagine.
Perhaps. I'm not much of a military person, so I can only suppose.
But in the conclusion of this war, if it goes Russia's way, they achieve their objectives, right? What does peace look like? We are coming back to the objectives of. You see, what I still can't understand is then, let's just say Russia prevails, as they should do, right? They've got the might on their side. Who rules Ukraine? Yanukovych? Vladimir Putin? Certainly not Zelensky.
It's not sorry. It's not my level of. I can't see.
Yeah.
I don't have enough information.
Yeah.
First of all, to comment on the issues of this magnitude, like you have outlined. So I will definitely try to look for the answer to this question for you. In the speeches, numerous speeches and numerous discussions of our leadership, of political leadership, military leadership, and once I I find this answer, I will let you know.
Okay, and insofar as the military operation has gone so far, Russia has made some interesting allies, right? We hear about Iranian drones, arms from North Korea, and even a little closer to home, some of those countries that won't condemn what Russia's done.
I would recommend that you should not believe everything you hear.
Okay.
Okay. There have been several official statements by the Russian side regarding the equipment coming from abroad, if it is coming at all. I recommend you to familiarize yourself with these documents. So because there are lots of misinformation, lots of distorted information, lots of fakes coming from the West, coming from Ukraine and spread by the Western media, mainstream media. So we should not take them all as for granted.
Okay. And to everybody that has joined us today, Mikhail, we did, we're not going to discuss South Africa's role. We understand that. And maybe as this saga rolls on, the special military operation, we'll get you back here to discuss, especially as it draws to an end. But Mikhail Kosarev, thank you so much for coming out here and answering the questions. To everybody that joined us today, thank you so much for watching The State of the Nation. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, please become a part of our supporters club, and you can get some extra content that won't be available to everybody. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the join button, and become part of The State of the Nation. Mikhail, thank you so much for joining us today. To everybody that's been here, we'll see you the next time on The State of the Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.